December the 17th, 1944, 2:47 a.m., Bastogne, Belgium. Oberst Friedrich von der Heydte crouched in a frozen foxhole, examining what his paratroopers had stripped from a dead American GI. In his gloved hands, a small cardboard box marked Meal, Combat, Individual. Inside, he found ham and eggs, crackers, chocolate, cigarettes, and toilet paper. His combat-hardened soldiers were eating better as prisoners than his own men had eaten in months. Here's the twist everyone gets wrong about World War II logistics. It wasn't won by tanks or planes. It was won by 16 billion small brown boxes that German high command dismissed as American luxury. Stay for the moment a Nazi general realized his entire war strategy was based on a catastrophic miscalculation. What von der Heydte didn't know was that he was holding the physical manifestation of American industrial supremacy. The mathematics of victory were already written in those mundane cardboard containers. Every K-Ration represented something impossible, a nation that could feed its soldiers better in combat than most civilians ate at home. The K-Ration represented 3,000 calories of scientifically balanced nutrition, hermetically sealed with technology borrowed from the Campbell Soup Company. While Germany's Wehrmacht marched on black bread and ersatz coffee, Americans had created something unprecedented. Here's what's insane about this. Among the 75,000 American troops surrounded at Bastogne that morning were men who had become legends of the Battle of the Bulge. But on December 17th, they were just hungry soldiers opening boxes that contained more food variety than most German civilians had seen since 1941. They complained about the taste while unknowingly demonstrating why their enemies couldn't win. This story reveals how industrial capacity defeated military genius, and how Hitler's confidence turned to desperate panic when his generals discovered what American logistics could really do. But wait till you see what happened when they did the math. Oberst von der Heydte wasn't some desk-bound Prussian aristocrat playing at war. This was Germany's premier paratrooper commander, veteran of Crete, Russia, and Normandy. A man who'd calculated supply requirements for elite airborne operations across 3 continents. When his 6th Paratrooper Regiment overran American positions during the opening hours of the Battle of the Bulge, he expected to find the usual wartime rations, maybe some canned meat, hardtack, whatever field expedient garbage soldiers everywhere made do with. What he found broke his understanding of warfare itself. "Impossible," he muttered in German, examining the contents spread across his makeshift command post. Ham and lima beans, beef and pork loaf, malted milk tablets, 4 cigarettes, chewing gum, a chocolate bar that wasn't a Satz, real chocolate, the kind German children hadn't tasted since 1940, and toilet paper, actual toilet paper, soft and white, individually wrapped like it was precious cargo. His aide, Hauptmann Müller, picked up one of the small cans. "Herr Oberst, this is beef, real beef, and look at this." He held up a tin opener specifically designed for the cans. They manufacture specialized tools just for opening their combat rations. Von der Heydte had been calculating logistics for airborne operations since 1940. He knew what it took to keep soldiers fed in combat. The average German soldier received 3,096 calories per day on paper, if supply lines held, if the Quartermaster Corps functioned, if enemy action didn't disrupt the carefully orchestrated dance of horse-drawn wagons and rail transport that kept armies moving. In reality, his paratroopers often fought on 1,800 calories of black bread, margarine, and whatever they could forage. But this was just the beginning. Friedrich von der Heydte came from a world where military logistics meant careful calculation of every gram. Born into Bavarian nobility in 1907, he'd earned his doctorate in international law before the war transformed him into Germany's most innovative airborne tactician. His paratroopers called him Papa Heydte. He was the kind of commander who shared his men's hardships, who understood that armies moved on their stomachs. He'd planned the airborne assault on Crete in 1941, calculating exactly how much ammunition, water and food each paratrooper could carry. Every ounce mattered when you were jumping behind enemy lines. He'd learned to think in terms of caloric density, nutritional efficiency, weight-to-energy ratios. A chocolate bar was 500 calories in 100 grams. A tin of sardines gave you protein and fat for 150 grams of carry weight. These were the brutal mathematics that separated elite soldiers from dead ones. His assessment of American military capability was based on this expertise. Americans, he believed, were soft, industrial, accustomed to plenty. They'd crumble under the harsh realities of combat logistics. Their supply lines would stretch and break. Their soldiers would starve when faced with the calculated deprivation that hardened German veterans into efficient killing machines. Von der Heydte had watched German soldiers perform miracles of endurance on minimal rations. At Stalingrad, men had fought for weeks on horse meat and melted snow. In Italy, his paratroopers had held mountain positions while living on 900 calories a day. This was what created superior soldiers, the ability to function when reduced to absolute essentials. But scattered across his command post was evidence that his entire worldview was wrong. These Americans weren't being reduced to essentials. They were being sustained at a level that seemed wastefully abundant, and somehow, impossibly, this abundance was reaching them in the middle of a surprise attack, in the depths of winter, surrounded and cut off from their supply lines. His wife's last letter, received 3 weeks ago, had described the joy their children felt at receiving a single orange for Christmas. These American soldiers were carrying individually wrapped pieces of chocolate into combat. The K-Ration wasn't an accident, it was industrial warfare made edible. In 1941, physiologist Ancel Keys at the University of Minnesota received an impossible assignment from the US Army Quartermaster Corps. Create a complete meal that could survive extreme temperatures, required no preparation, weighed under 3 pounds, and provided balanced nutrition for active soldiers. Oh, and make it taste good enough that men would actually eat it instead of trading it for cigarettes. Keys assembled a team that included food scientists, nutritionists, and engineers from companies like Heinz, Campbell Soup, and Wrigley. They weren't just creating military rations, they were solving the fundamental equation of modern warfare. How do you maintain peak human performance when traditional supply chains collapse? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: commercial food packaging technology. Campbell Soup had developed hermetic sealing processes that could preserve food for years without refrigeration. Wrigley contributed research on portable high-energy foods that wouldn't melt in tropical heat or freeze solid in Arctic conditions. Heinz provided expertise in mass production of canned goods that could survive being dropped from aircraft or bounced around in the back of trucks crossing broken terrain. But here's the insane part. The K-Ration was designed to exceed the nutritional requirements of combat soldiers, not meet them, exceed them. The average K-Ration provided 3,300 calories, with carefully balanced proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and essential vitamins. German combat rations, when available, provided 2,400 calories on paper, maybe even 800 in reality. Each component was engineered for specific purposes. The chocolate wasn't just candy, it was a Hershey's D-bar, formulated to provide sustained energy release and resist melting in desert heat. The cigarettes weren't luxury items. Nicotine was understood to improve alertness and reduce appetite, extending the effectiveness of the meal. Even the toilet paper served a military purpose, providing sanitary conditions that reduced dysentery and kept soldiers combat effective. The production numbers were staggering. By 1943, American factories were producing 5 million K-Rations per month. By D-Day, that number had reached 15 million monthly. Each ration required coordination between dozens of suppliers, specialized packaging equipment, and quality control systems that rejected any unit failing to meet exact specifications. This wasn't just engineering, it was industrial warfare at its most elegant. While German quartermasters calculated how to stretch dwindling supplies across ever longer supply lines, Americans had solved the equation by eliminating the supply line entirely. Every soldier carried 3 days of complete nutrition in his pack. 16 billion. That's how many individual combat meals America produced during World War II. Not 16 million. Billion! With a B. To put that in perspective, if you lined up every K-Ration, C-Ration, and emergency ration produced by American factories between 1941 and 1945, they would stretch from New York to Los Angeles and back again 47 times. Germany's entire wartime food production for military and civilian populations combined was less than what America fed just its combat troops. But here's where it gets crazy. Those 16 billion meals were just the beginning. American industrial capacity was so vast that K-Rations became the standard ration for British commandos, Free French resistance fighters, Chinese nationalist forces, and Soviet Guards units. America was literally feeding its allies better than most of their civilians had eaten in peacetime. The mathematics were impossible by German standards. Each K-Ration required 1 can of meat, average 6 ounces, 1 packet of biscuits, 4 ounces, 1 chocolate bar, 2 ounces, 1 packet of coffee, 0.5 ounces, 4 cigarettes, chewing gum, salt, sugar, and toilet paper. Multiply that by 16 billion units. America was producing more high-quality beef for combat rations than Germany produced for its entire civilian population. Pattern interrupt. Here's what really broke German calculations. American soldiers were complaining about K-Rations. GIs wrote letters home calling them monotonous, bland, unsatisfying. They were complaining about food that German generals would have considered a feast. Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper, regularly ran articles about soldiers' grievances with their rations. In Germany, complaining about food rations was a court-martial offence. The numbers were staggering, but the human cost was even more shocking. German commanders were starting to realise they weren't fighting an army. They were fighting an entire industrial civilization that could afford to wage war without sacrifice. By December 1944, Oberst von der Heydte understood German supply reality better than most officers at OKW headquarters. His paratroopers had been fighting on reduced rations since October. Coffee was ersatz, roasted barley and acorns. Meat was whatever could be requisitioned from increasingly desperate local authorities. Chocolate was a memory from before the war. The average German combat ration in late 1944 consisted of 700 grams of bread, often stretched with sawdust, 120 grams of meat, frequently horse meat or worse, 30 grams of fat, usually margarine made from coal tar derivatives, and ersatz coffee that tasted like burnt wood chips. Total caloric value, maybe 2,200 calories if you were lucky, 600 if supply lines were disrupted. But calories weren't the real problem. The real problem was logistics infrastructure that was collapsing under the weight of total war. German supply trains were being bombed daily by Allied fighter bombers. Horse-drawn transport, yes, the Wehrmacht still relied heavily on horses, was breaking down as forage became impossible to find. Fuel shortages meant that even when food was available at depots, it couldn't reach frontline units. Von der Heydte's supply officer, Oberleutnant Richter, had shown him the mathematics of desperation. Their regiment was supposed to receive 3.2 tons of food per day to maintain full strength. In reality, they'd been receiving 1.8 tons on good days, 0.4 tons when Allied air attacks disrupted rail transport. Men were losing weight, losing strength, losing the physical capacity to carry equipment and fight effectively. Strategic implications were becoming clear to anyone willing to face reality. Germany was fighting a war of attrition against an enemy that could afford to waste resources. American soldiers were throwing away half-eaten K-Rations, food that represented more nutrition than German soldiers received in 2 days. The psychological impact was devastating. How do you maintain fighting spirit when the enemy's garbage is better than your best meal? Emotional peak. Von der Heydte thought about his own children, eating turnip soup and potato peels while enemy soldiers carried chocolate bars into battle. This wasn't just military defeat. It was the collapse of everything he'd believed about German superiority, efficiency, and resolve. The moment of complete understanding came on December 22, 1944. Von der Heydte's intelligence officer brought him captured American supply documents, not battle plans or troop movements, but quartermaster reports. Routine logistics paperwork that revealed the true scope of what Germany was fighting. Herr Oberst, Hauptmann Weber said quietly, you need to see this. The documents were mundane. Supply requisitions, delivery schedules, inventory reports. But the numbers they contained were impossible. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded at Bastogne with no functioning supply lines, had requested and expected to receive 75,000 K-Rations, 15,000 D-Rations, emergency chocolate bars, 3,200 gallons of coffee, and 50,000 cigarettes per day. Von der Heydte read the documents 3 times. His own regiment, with roughly equivalent manpower, received supplies measured in kilograms, not tons. These Americans, cut off and surrounded, were planning to eat better than German garrison troops in Berlin. But the real breaking point came in a personal letter, captured from a dead American lieutenant. The officer had written to his wife, "The food here is terrible. Same old K-Rations every day. I'd kill for some of your pot roast and apple pie. At least we're getting hot coffee now that the supply drops are working again." Supply drops working again, in the middle of winter, surrounded by German forces, with Luftwaffe fighters supposedly controlling the airspace. These Americans were complaining about food variety, while German paratroopers dreamed of eating their daily bread ration without having to pick out the sawdust. Von der Heydte wrote in his diary that night, "We are not fighting soldiers. We are fighting a machine that transforms entire continents into weapons. Their complaints about food would be celebrations for our men. How does one defeat an enemy for whom warfare itself is a form of abundance?" The psychological collapse was complete. Every tactical victory, every breakthrough, every moment of German success was revealed as meaningless against an enemy that could lose entire divisions and replace them within weeks, fully equipped and better fed than German elite units. Human drama. That same night, von der Heydte received a letter from his wife describing how their 8-year-old daughter had burst into tears of joy upon receiving a single egg for her birthday. Meanwhile, American soldiers were trading cigarettes from their K-Rations because they had more than they could smoke. Word spread through German command structure like wildfire, not through official channels but through the whispered conversations of officers who'd seen captured American supplies. Quick succession of documented reactions. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, after reviewing intelligence reports. "They feed their soldiers better than we feed our generals." SS Oberfuhrer Wilhelm Munke, commanding the 1st SS Panzer Division. "Mein Gott, their garbage detail eats meat every day." Generalfeldmarschall Walter Model, Army Group B commander, in a letter to his wife. "The enemy's logistics are not military, they are miraculous." The news reached different levels of command at different speeds. Field commanders like von der Heydte understood immediately. They were seeing the evidence firsthand. Division commanders needed reports to believe it. Corps commanders required statistical analysis. But at every level the response was the same: stunned disbelief followed by growing despair. Multiple perspectives emerged as the reality sank in. Tank commanders reported that American armoured units carried more spare parts than German factories could produce. Artillery officers discovered that American gun crews fired more shells in daily harassment missions than German batteries received for major offensives. Infantry colonels learned that American rifle companies carried more ammunition in their standard load than German regiments had in reserve. But the food revelations hit hardest because they were so personal, so immediate. Every German soldier understood hunger. They'd all learned to stretch rations, to make thin soup from bones, to feel grateful for a slice of black bread. Discovering that their enemies considered such conditions unthinkable wasn't just tactically significant, it was emotionally devastating. How the news spread through command. Radio intercepts picked up American soldiers complaining about K-Ration monotony. Captured documents revealed supply officers worrying about troop morale if fresh fruit deliveries were delayed. Prisoner interrogations confirmed that American soldiers genuinely expected 3 hot meals per day, with multiple options available. German High Command's response revealed how completely they misunderstood what they were fighting. OKW issued new directives emphasizing efficient resource utilization and strategic conservation of supplies. They ordered studies of American ration production, hoping to identify vulnerabilities in the supply chain. The studies came back with conclusions that read like science fiction. American K-Ration production required coordination between 847 different suppliers across 43 states. The chocolate alone involved sugar plantations in Hawaii, cocoa processing in Pennsylvania, milk from Wisconsin dairy farms, and packaging machinery manufactured in Ohio. Yet somehow, this impossibly complex system was producing finished rations faster than German factories could manufacture simple black bread. Leadership's policy changes grew increasingly desperate. New regulations limited German officer rations to match enlisted men's, not to improve equality, but because there simply wasn't enough food to maintain traditional privileges. Foraging was officially encouraged, then mandated. Horses, previously reserved for transport, were reclassified as emergency food sources. Tactical adaptations proved futile. German commanders tried rapid offensive operations designed to capture American supply depots before K-Rations could be consumed or destroyed. They discovered that American units carried enough individual rations to operate independently for weeks. Cutting supply lines didn't create the expected shortages, it just meant Americans ate K-Rations instead of hot meals prepared by field kitchens. Technical analysis made the situation even more hopeless. Each K-Ration represented industrial capacity equivalent to 1.2 artillery shells in terms of raw materials, manufacturing complexity, and transportation requirements. America was producing 15 million K-Rations per month, while simultaneously outproducing Germany in artillery ammunition by a factor of 7 to 1. They weren't choosing between feeding troops and arming them. They were doing both at levels that exceeded Germany's total industrial output. The most devastating realization: American abundance wasn't the result of superior strategy or leadership. It was simply the baseline capability of an untouched industrial base. While German factories were being bombed daily and raw materials were increasingly scarce, American production was accelerating. They were fighting at maybe 60% of their actual capacity, treating World War II as a manageable industrial problem rather than a life-or-death struggle. By March 1945, Oberst von der Heydter had accepted the mathematical certainty of defeat. Not because German soldiers lacked courage, skill, or determination, but because they were fighting an enemy for whom warfare was a form of industrial exercise rather than national survival. His final diary entry, dated April 15, 1945, captured the complete transformation. Today, my aide shared a captured American medical report. Their army doctors are concerned about obesity among rear echelon personnel. Obesity. While our men die of starvation, theirs grow fat. This is not defeat. It is education about the true nature of power in the modern world. The last desperate attempts at resistance revealed how completely German thinking had changed. Operation Werewolf, the planned guerrilla resistance, failed partly because German soldiers couldn't imagine fighting without regular supply lines. They'd been trained to calculate resources carefully, to make every bullet and every calorie count. Guerrilla warfare required the kind of abundance mentality that only their enemies possessed. Character transformation was complete. Von der Heydter, who'd begun the war believing in German military superiority, ended it understanding that military excellence was irrelevant against industrial supremacy. Technical skill, tactical brilliance, strategic insight, all meaningless when the enemy could afford to lose entire armies and replace them without noticeable strain on their economy. His surrender on May 8, 1945, included a remarkable statement to American interrogators. "You did not defeat us with your weapons, you defeated us with your lunchboxes. Every K-ration was proof that we were fighting a different kind of war than the one we prepared for." The psychological journey was complete, from confidence to bewilderment to resignation to acceptance. But the acceptance wasn't bitter. It was almost relieved. Fighting an enemy you understand is one thing. Fighting an enemy whose casual abundance exceeds your maximum effort is something else entirely. Post-war testimonies confirmed what von der Heydter had realized in those frozen Belgian forests. General Alfred Jodl, at the Nuremberg trials, "We calculated American industrial capacity before the war. We calculated wrong, not by percentages, by orders of magnitude." Field Marshal Kesselring in his memoirs. "Their soldiers complained about food that would have been feast days for ours. This was the real secret of their victory. They could afford to be careless with resources that were precious to us." Statistical summary of the gap. America produced 16 billion individual combat meals during the war. Germany produced enough military rations to feed their army for roughly 18 months at full strength. The difference wasn't efficiency, it was the gap between a nation fighting for survival and a nation fighting as an industrial project. But the universal truth about modern warfare became clear only decades later. Von der Heydter, interviewed in 1965, reflected, "We thought we were fighting Americans. We were actually fighting American factories, American farms, American transportation networks. The soldiers were just the delivery system for industrial capacity we couldn't comprehend." Modern relevance connects directly to today's conflicts. Every time military analysts discuss logistics, they reference the K-Ration model. Not the food itself, but the principle. Modern warfare is won by the side that can sustain abundance where enemies can only manage survival. Whether it's precision munitions, fuel supplies, or soldier equipment, victory belongs to whoever can treat expensive resources as expendable. The K-Ration story reveals something profound about power in the modern world. Technical superiority, tactical brilliance, even strategic genius become irrelevant when fighting an enemy for whom your maximum effort represents their normal capacity. It's a lesson that applies far beyond military conflicts, to economic competition, technological development, and global influence. That small cardboard box von der Heydter, examined in 1944, represented something unprecedented in human history. A civilization so wealthy, that it could wage global war without requiring sacrifice from its citizens. The real victory wasn't D-Day, or the Battle of the Bulge. It was the moment German officers realised they were fighting an enemy that could afford to waste more resources than Germany could produce. The math was always impossible. They just hadn't done the calculations correctly.